and G5 staff positions in support of training exercise, specifically focused on trying to develop more depth to the civil common operating picture as it pertains to civil affairs, and upcoming training exercises to include Avenger Triad, Austere Challenge, and the upcoming Warfighter exercise 25-4 for the G9 for 3 Corps, one of our down trace units. Sir.
Thank you. Kason?
Sir, thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I'm Major Kason Kimberly. On the TPU side, I've been a company commander in the 450. I've been a team chief in the 451st Civil Affairs Battalion out of Houston, Texas. A team chief and a company commander out of the 490th in Dallas. Most recently, as as a deputy operations officer at the 353 in Staten Island. I'm out here on I'm now assigned to the Plans and Exercises Division of the USERAF G3 CA Division in Wiesbaden. So I work pretty closely with Lieutenant Colonel Swearat and also with Colonel Newman, focusing on our long-term plans to include our ability to converge with NATO assets and on USERAF's long-term plans and integration, including the awareness and the adoption of the CIMIC framework and CIMIC principles, and particularly how that differs for units arriving stateside that have a civil affairs background. In the civilian world, I have a JD from the SMU Dedman School of Law in Dallas. I'm a practicing attorney in Texas and Louisiana.
Excellent, thank you. Master Sergeant Roscoe?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Master Sergeant Roscoe here at Fort Knox. I'm here at 5th Corps. I'm the Senior Civil Affairs Operations NCO in the G9. I've been here for the last couple of years, but have spent most of my time forward in Europe, mostly in Poland. My background is I'm from the 91st, so I'm a Africa background, but I also spent some time being a soft skills instructor in SWIC, and I'm a graduate of the National Defense University, and I'm here on my broadening assignment as a Master Sergeant, but I'm heading back to the 91st here very shortly. So I appreciate everybody having me here today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. So I'm going to give a bit quick scene setter, and then we'll go into the Q&A. For those that experienced UCOM, years ago, let's say during GWAT, it was somewhat of a sleepier theater, and then a highlighted focus returned to the theater in 2014 when Russia invaded the Donbass and Crimea. Operation Atlantic Resolve, which is the U.S. commitment to the European Defense Initiative, included rotational CA forces from the 353 in 2015, and they deployed initially into Poland, Slovakia, Hungary. The 92nd CA Battalion also focused on critical NATO members in the Baltics and Balkans, as well as partners in the Caucasus. The rotations continued as the American contribution to NATO's enhanced forward presence evolved. The reactivation of 5 Corps after a 7-year absence on the continent
Hey, Tony, I think you froze if you can hear us. Colonel Swear, are you able to hear me?
Hey, Colonel, it's Colonel Kai. I hear you just fine. And
Okay.
No worries. What we're going to do is I'll send Tony a message on the side, and he may have some connection issues. If it's okay, I'm not sure where he was going next, but I believe the next portion was going to be some of the question and answers to go into that dialogue. I know the very first few questions we have already tracked down already, and the panel is going to be prepared to respond to them. So I'm going to ask Colonel Pajak, could you step in for Tony there and start the panel and ask the very first questions?
Thanks, sir.
Yes, I can do that. I just need about 20 seconds. Stand by. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of continue off where Tony left off regarding kind of the history stage setter of where we're at. So USEUCOM, USERAF, SOCUR, NATO structures, they've been staffed by active duty CA throughout their history. For example, the CA Associate President was an ADR planner at SOCUR, and historically the 353 KCOM has had the longest tenure of the support in the theater, including exercises support to return forces to Germany, like reforger exercises in the 80s and the 90s, as well as later mobilizations for S4 and K4 in the Balkans in the late 90s and the early 2000s. But following the growth in the civil affairs branch during GWAT, which is kind of where Tony left off, the Seventh Mission Support Command added the 361st and the 457th to support the conventional formations in theater. The activation of the 95th and 92nd, 2007 provided the dedicated SOF, and then 353, that's where 353 and the 7th MSC capabilities stepped up to support the conventional forces. Rotational support primarily focused on key events such as many of the exercises that Swarwat, Jonathan, and Kassan already mentioned, and that has continued. While the 361st and 457, they did a lot of the short-term missions in support of the in support of USERER. And then where Tony was talking about 2014, where Russia invaded the Donbass and Crimea, and then we really needed to focus in. Operations of Atlantic Resolve and European Defense Initiative, that included the constant rotational forces. We're almost providing, 353 is almost providing 100 soldiers every 9 months, near 100 soldiers every 9 months into theater. And this included, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. And while the 92nd continued to focus on critical battalion, focused on critical NATO members in the Baltics as well, and in the Caucasus. The rotations continued as the American contributors to NATO enhanced forward presence evolved. The reactivation of 5th Corps after a 7-year absence on the continent in 2020 reintroduced the Corps planning capability into the theater, and the requirements just continue to increase. Permanently forward forces with 5th Corps, and there was 2 divisions at one time. Now we're back down to 1 division headquarters, as well as an increase. Like I already mentioned, we're almost up to 100 soldiers every 9 months that we're deploying into theater. And we are holding, and that's for USERAF, 21st TSC, and 5th Corps. But we are also holding the positions of the 9s for SAGU, USERAF, and now 5th Corps. Our first rotation of being the 9 with 06 presence. Following the 2022 Russian invasion, NATO moved very quickly, and they exhibited an openness, not what we saw, and the panel members will touch on this. After the 2020 invasion, we saw an openness that NATO moved very quickly, and an openness that we hadn't previously seen from them. And that was really centered around the 7 baseline resiliency assessments and the revision of the war plans, as well as the commitment to those plans. So which forces, what structures were they going to provide to those war plans, which is something we had never seen before. With USERAF, and then what was designated out of those plans was USERAF is going to be the multi-corps land component command structure underneath the Article 5. And this is also kind of alluding to what Colonel Newman was saying, is that we've got to be able to fight under CIMIC, under NATO, because we're designated, USERAF is designated as that MCLEG. Then moving on, we fast forwarded 2022, 2024, units are grappling to prepare and practice the war plans through sovereign countries who are also concurrently growing their military capabilities. And they're also trying to figure out their roles of the regular military forces, also their territorial defense forces, or what we call internal defense forces, and the government trying to support those plans. How are they going to feed that war beast in conflict? And then fast forward again to January 4th, 2025, and we continue to maintain the momentum. How are we going to continue to maintain the momentum that was established after 2022 while being that trusted partner, but with the uncertain future of what the shape of European defense is going to take? Sorry. Little long history there, cut there. With that, we'll begin with our first discussion point regarding the ongoing engagements with partners in a changing environment over time. And we're going to start with Master Sergeant Roscoe. As a reminder to all the panelists and the audience, we encourage this to be as interactive as possible. So please continue with your chat comments. Please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions. And then just a reminder, again, all of our panelists are representing themselves, and they are not representing the organizations or speaking on behalf of the organizations that they're with. So with that, Master Sergeant Roscoe, you have a long history supporting this theater and have seen firsthand the changes since 2022. How would you describe the changes you witnessed and how the command and staff and the G9 work together to manage the updates of updating the changes and staffing the changes, and how they approached the environment?
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Once again, good morning, everybody. So some changes. So I think the big thing is that we, not just in European theater or civil affairs, but the whole Army, the whole military has gone from this coin fight, 20 plus years of fighting 1-year wars to now getting ready for large scale combat operations, which is really important. So the focus for 5th Corps has been on U.S. war fighting and our posture. And a lot of that is done through our partners here along, AO Victory, the eastern flank of NATO. So we really have to understand like the battle space in the operation that we are that environment that we're operating in, and where we are in that battle space, and who's fighting next to us, who's fighting adjacent to us, and then also like what is going on in our rear area. So developing and building out a relationship with our partners, being civil authorities as well as territorial defense forces, which we would say in 5th Corps is probably our partner of choice when it comes to like working within host nation entities. It's really important for what we're trying to get at when we're talking about war, 5th Corps war fighting and the U.S. war fighting. So that's really been the big shift. It hasn't always been easy. I think old habits die hard, and there's a lot of assumptions when it comes to LISCO and everybody's habits and how we've used to do things and how we do things now. But the European theater is a pretty unique environment. I would say that it's very complex in a sense that a lot of nations are similar, but they're different because they're sovereign nations. They have their own crisis response plans and total defense plans. What is kind of foreign to a lot of us who've worked in other theaters. But it's also good because they're very capable and ready and resilient. So that helps us out. So it's complex in the sense of permissions and authorities and the things that we're allowed to do and who we work through. but it's not complex in a sense that everybody's so different. So that's just really where we are as we are transitioning and how things are changing. I think everybody has a common goal in this theater when we look across our allies and our partners. So that's always a very good start. So it's really just with Fifth Corps is improving the interoperability with those allies and partners, and just preparing ourselves to respond together for crisis and conflict.
Hey, this is Tony Baja back on. Sorry, had a little internet blip there. Next question is for Major Kimberly. In the past several months, there have been major European engagements like the Munich Security Conference. What has been the atmosphere like when participating with partners, and has it been different or challenging? What are the ways you can continue to focus on your commander's objectives?
Well, I think that it is when you look at the broader geopolitical background of something like the Munich conference, or what's happening at the policy making level, I think that when you look at the temperature of our European partners and our NATO member partners, I think that I would say there's an increasing awareness of the challenge that they're facing. And I also think that there's a greater shared purpose, just like Master Sergeant Roscoe was alluding to. So I think one of the couple of concrete examples of how that has been developing in the last couple of months that I can share. So the USERAF G3 Civil Affairs Division, we hosted a symposium last week that was attended by, and Colonel Swarat can double check me. I think we had probably 12 participating nations. We had about an attendance of about 120. And we decided, especially thinking about those common challenge and unity type questions, to focus in the symposium on hybrid warfare. And so to anchor the discussion, we invited the Hybrid Center of Excellence, which is headquartered in Helsinki. We invited them to sort of give the keynote address, and a Canadian colonel named Alan Best showed up to provide the presentation, where we sort of went in a deep dive through the different ways that not just the frontline countries, but every NATO member state is being targeted in these sort of hybrid and sub-attributable types of ways and conflicts through weaponizing migration, or the examples we've seen of damage to undersea cables or manipulating the information environment. And I really think that what we're starting to do, and what we managed to engage by focusing the conversation at that level, is an awareness that every NATO member state is being targeted in some way or another, and that this is a common fight, that this is not just an issue for the frontline states. This is not just an issue for Poland and the Baltic states and states close to them, that this is a common fight and with a common purpose. So I do see I see an increasing awareness in the time that I've been here and the time that I've been involved in the European theater, that there are collective challenges that require a collective response. And I would say that at the level of the NATO member militaries that we have the privilege to work with and interact with at the level of the USERAF Civil Affairs Division, that they're taking it seriously, and that we have a role in helping prompt those conversations, and in being, continuing to be a partner, but focus in every way we can on augmenting their capabilities, their access to information, their awareness of what our structure looks like, and what we would provide as civil affairs if we had to, provide and augment additional capabilities. I would also say we had a chance to, Colonel Swarat and I, we both participated in a webinar discussion last month at the CCOE, moderated by Lieutenant Colonel Newman, which really had the takeaway of, in addition to a lot of other things, one of the key takeaways is an increasing awareness that many of our partner nations have something to learn from civil affairs and from some of the lessons that we have learned throughout history and incorporated into best practices in 357 and elsewhere. That I'm really looking forward to see how that develops and how we sort of build our inner linkage and continue to develop the capabilities of our partners.
Great, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Newman, you have a very unique seat sitting in the NATO CIMIC Center of Excellence. It must be fascinating due to the diverse range of countries represented there and the training that you support. It may be challenging as the only American for our partners. And do they provide any perspectives, or do they ask you questions? What has been the level of curiosity?
Yes, sir. Think of it this way. The NATO CIMIC Center of Excellence is like the schoolhouse. So it's similar to SWIC, but for NATO CIMIC. Keep in mind that, like civil affairs in the United States, CIMIC is not a basic branch for most of these nations. They enter CIMIC later in their careers. They don't officially become CIMIC or branch CIMIC. Like, there's not the designator the way we would receive as a 38. They just kind of come into this, learn these the curriculum by coming to the CCOE, and they're plugged into these roles for so many years. After that, they usually go back to wherever they came from. So if they came from logistics or some kind of maneuver function and so forth. What's really important to us, and I kind of hit on this earlier, is that CIMIC does have its differences with civil affairs. Civil affairs is a bit more vertical. It encompasses a lot more. Its authorities tend to be broader. CIMIC is a lot of liaison with host nation. Because of being NATO, we are expected to operate in any one of our 32 nations, member nations. But these are very sovereign nations. They have their own capabilities, their own military structures and so forth. So for a foreign military, allied or not, to come into these nations and do as they please, the way we might do in a distressed nation or a failed state, absolutely not going to work. We have to basically, in order to conduct that civ mill, we have to do the mill to mill first. So if we're operating in a nation, whether it's peacetime vigilance, crisis, or conflict, we work through host nation CIMIC forces, and they engage their civil authorities, their international organizations or NGOs, and so forth. And that's kind of really the foundation. And for U.S. Army civil affairs, that's pretty new to us, because we were speaking a moment ago. We went from COIN, right? Master Roscoe was talking about. We went from 20 years of COIN to now this is LISCO. The Russians aren't going to do a counterinsurgency. They're going to come with massive, tank armies and so forth and push toward us. So really, on that note, if we think we're going to go and just engage people as we please, a civil affairs team or whatever element, knock on the mayor's door of some village in Lithuania and start talking, that's just not going to happen. It's not going to work at all. So we have to learn how to operate within this structure, because again, as I mentioned, when the flag goes up and there's a declaration of Article 5, we become NATO CIMIC. So we can take our civil affairs stuff and we can put it on the shelf momentarily, as long as we're operating under Article 5. So it's really up to the CCOE, especially in this position as the interoperability officer, to ensure that these FTNs that are coming and rotating through theater every 9 months understand that. And it's absolutely critical that we bring them here to the CCOE so that they undergo this training. And this training is usually just 2 weeks, but it gives you a very solid overview of what CIMIC is and how it's conducted. Sir.
So follow-up question was in the chat from Chris Holshek. What is the forward movement for U.S. having a permanent representative at the CCOE?
Yeah, it's there. It's pretty much our top priority right now. The intent is that we would become a sponsoring nation. We'll join the other 5 sponsoring nations, which accompany the 2 framework nations. And we would have a billet from SWIC sitting right here in this office. I think right now, R-Struck was our biggest kind of punch in the gut for this, because we're losing so many of our Compo 1 CA And this billet really needs to be sourced through SWIC. So it really needs to be a 38 Sierra. And SWIC basically said, we support you. Major General Slider is 100% on board, but he said, I just don't have a body to give. So now we're kind of in the discussions via USEUCOM to be a sponsoring nation, but without a permanent billet. And there's a couple others here in the CCOE. Latvia and Slovenia are sponsoring nations. They unfortunately don't have the personnel to give either. So it's not like we would be different or unique from else. But this position, it is our intent in USERAF to keep this position here. The position I am is an ADOS position, sourced, of course, through 353, because it's the interoperability thing that matters so much. And this is really, this was General Williams, CG of USERAF's priority. This is now General Donahue, the current CG of USERAF's priority. This whole convergence of USERAF and NATO, what we call the multi-core land component command, is that we need to be on the same page and we need to speak the same language and walk in step. And if we don't know the doctrine, that's just not going to work.
Great points. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'd like to open it up to anybody on the panel at this point. What changes are you seeing with your planning, civil affairs operations with the or any initial thoughts on USAID's current disposition in the theater?
So the question specifically is pertaining to USAID or just US
Yes.
involvement in leadership?
And interaction, you know, so like ECJ9 and whatnot.
So, sir, from my perspective, again, kind of following up with the point that Major Kimberly brought up, is that, you know, our European partners and friends are very much aware of potentially some of the shifts in priorities as far as we look at, you know, we're discussing the European Theater of Operations, Indo-PACOM, trying to stretch resources and make resources work in order to still address competition between malign actors in two different theaters of operations. So with that being said, having spoken to some of our CIMIC partners, some of our interagency partners, there's been an increased emphasis on host nation as well as European Union humanitarian assistance and development projects, specifically when you discuss 7 baseline resiliencies within NATO countries, as well as capabilities and capacities to maintain civil authority and civil governance. And one of the things we come across as a USERAF Civil Affairs Division is, again, working by, with, and through host nation forces, trying to determine where those thresholds might be breached, where we can support those thresholds if and when an ask comes. So trying to lean forward without leaning too far forward and violating one of our authorities or violating a host nation's internal sovereignty, as well as national pride too. There's a very strong sense of togetherness as well as unity of effort when it comes to civil defense within our European allies. Lithuania is one of the examples. Every year, Lithuania practices and rehearses their internal civil defense plans. They're very proud of it. They have a very robust civil defense apparatus that they exercise regularly. And we have been assured by CIMIC partners coming out from those nations that once combat operations cease, they will take ownership of that AOR. They have it. They will rebuild. They will bring back civil services and civil governance. They do not need U.S. intervention, or they do not need as much U.S. intervention as what you'd see potentially in like a coin environment or operating within a failed state. So kind of answer your question in a roundabout way, sir. I would say with maybe realignment of certain U.S. efforts and U.S. resources, the Europeans have become aware and have stepped up with an increased emphasis of using European-based agencies, specifically the European Union and European-based NGOs and IGOs.
And if I could add to that, Colonel Baha, we talk about, the instruments of national power, right? And USAID covers really 3 of the 4. We're the M. And of course, we cross over into, diplomacy, information, economic as well. But in order to have that full DIME, right? DIME, we need USAID. They've served as our implementing partner in various theaters throughout the world, not just during conflict, but even during peacetime. And think of it this way, USAID is very good with this development, right? We're looking at timelines. Development is long-term, right? Or we're talking years. The US military, civil affairs, or, whatever, not so much. And we're not supposed to be. It's really not, our mission to be at a place for a sustained period of time, conducting humanitarian operations. We come in early. We alleviate suffering. We support our commander's objectives, and then we conclude the mission. But you can't consolidate those gains and truly emphasize stability in the long term unless you have that development piece. In other words, somebody for us to hand that off to. And that's where USAID is coming in. I've worked with them in CENTCOM. I was on a PRT in Afghanistan. I worked with USAID. I've worked with them at a couple CTCs back CONUS. And I've learned a lot from them. These guys are really, really smart. And we could, have whatever ODACA, we used to have SERP, we could have all these funds, we could spend them accordingly. But all that's for naught if we can't hand that off in the long term, right? It just goes away. And I think that's something that we need to incorporate into our planning now, a world, or I guess a United States post USAID. And because we have to hand that off somehow.
Great point. Excellent. And I want to get to some of the questions that are in the chat here. There's a little bit of discussion on irregular warfare in conjunction with large-scale combat operations, and we all have assumptions of what LSCO will be, and who knows if it's not a total effort by whatever adversary it is. Has there been any discussion in the UCOM, USERAF theater, SOCUR on how an adversary might incorporate IW in conjunction with LSCO? Yes, Jonathan.
So amongst exercise design and treks, we've had long conversations about irregular warfare because you talk about, you have your float, your zone of contact, you have kind of the deep rear when you're talking about the enemy's deep rear, and that's where you will have a lot of soft involvement, soft CIMIC or civil affairs involvement. A lot of the conversations pertaining to irregular warfare in the European theater operations, at least that I've been involved in, have to do with either our rear, our air support zones, or even further back to the S-pods, A-pods, in the deep rear. One of the questions that came up is, at least from a host nation CIMIC perspective, is at what point is something considered combat operations, and at what point is something considered criminality? Because if you're looking for theater of operations from a hybrid standpoint, everything and anything is that threat. So you're talking law enforcement, fire, EMS, private public infrastructure, sewer, water, gas, anything that can disrupt civil society is now on the table. So how do you attribute something to an adversary if by definition it can't be attributed? And that's the one question we've been trying to get at. So what I would say is that we've been discussing different hybrid effects or different hybrid threats to a host nation, trying to utilize the resiliencies, and again, looking at those capacities, but also understanding that things aren't going to get better until we resolve that large-scale combat operations. So combat operations have to conclude before we can bring back some sort of normalcy to civilian or society. And that goes for everything from the deep rear all the way up to the float and beyond that. You're going to have territory occupied by malign actors. You're going to have contact zones. You're going to have areas that are going to be affected. You're talking potential denial of service attacks, cyber attacks, damage to telecommunications, anything like that. So when we're looking at irregular warfare, we're looking at irregular warfare not only from the standpoint of U.S. civil affairs and then European CIMIC, but also trying to build that interagency partnership between private public equities, civilian law enforcement. Certain European countries have more of a gendarme or a quasi paramilitary type law enforcement that kind of tries to fill the gap between the capabilities that the military has and then what local civilian law enforcement might be lacking just by nature of how they're arrayed. So that's been an ongoing discussion, and that's at least as far as higher level discussions as far as trying to build this into the exercise design. And what I say to you is this: is that it's tough. It's trying to get your hands around that aspect of the civil environment and trying to really determine and get after what does it look like and what do we need to do in order to, as ourselves sensors looking for those threats warning indicators, also understanding that civil CIMIC doctrine, transitioning away from civil affairs doctrine, is very passive, where a number of our CIMIC partners have acknowledged that there is an oversight capability in CIMIC for humanitarian assistance and assisting a host nation, but there's not a very robust detection apparatus when it comes to hybrid threats and irregular warfare. So what I would say to you this, sir, is it is an ongoing effort, but it is something that we're really trying to get ahead of it and be on the cutting edge of it. And that's where we see ourselves as far as civil affairs and CIMIC. We don't operate in, talking phase 1 to phase 0 to phase 1, deterrence to the beginning of operations. We're already operating 2-3 phases down the road, trying to look at the second, third, fourth order effects of, okay, the balloon goes up, this kicks off, where are the capacities and where are the shortcomings and where the gaps are going to be within that sphere. And then as the training environment transitions to contingency plans, how do we build that into a more robust contingency plan to try to fill those gaps and anticipate those gaps in service within the civilian sphere, sir?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Oh, I want to add on to that just real quick, sir, if I may. I think we've also had a little, it's been very useful to try to analyze this in terms of, okay, considering that hybrid threat and the sort of spectrum of competition and conflict, to look at, again, getting back to this question of ultimately being an asset to NATO and working by, with, and through NATO as an organization and its partner states, is to remember the 3 key operational articles of NATO and sort of what level of involvement corresponds to each of those. So working backwards, right? You have Article 5, and that's what everybody is. That's kind of what everybody's familiar with. That's what is the plan and the operation and the exercise design of that large scale combat operation in the event of declared Article 5 hostilities. Beneath that, there's Article 4. Which is an article that can be triggered, that has to be triggered by motion and by consent of the member nations to consult in the event of hostilities or conflict that is somewhere beneath the Article 5 spectrum. And so within that, there's a lot of conversations, and it gets back into the idea of the interagency involvement and just being a part of the dialogue and a part of the table to recognize that well below the Article 5 spectrum, there exist problems, there exist targets made of NATO member states that are well beyond the front lines. It was a really interesting question when we went through the symposium where our friends from the hybrid COE raised a number of scenarios and asked at the very last, the end of the last scenario, considering various efforts in hybrid warfare, okay, how many of you would declare Article 4 over this pattern of activities? And the vote was about half and half. That after a certain, there's a willingness out of about half of the audience of NATO CIMIC professionals that after a certain amount of encountered hybrid type targeting, hostilities directed at one of our member states, that it rose to the level that they would declare Article 4. Underneath that, there's also Article 3, which commits the NATO member states to working constantly in mutual aid and in self-defense to improve their capability to respond and their resilience against their societal resilience and their capability to respond. And that's where we sort of get into this question of the way that NATO analyzes the question of resilience within their seven baseline resiliencies framework, which has maps partially onto the idea of stability tasks in a CA framework. So I think that the linkage and understanding that there is that irregular warfare or hybrid warfare, that those paradigms can inflict problems and considerations on each of the partner nations' underlying resilience, either measured broadly or within the terms of those core baseline resiliencies, that sort of unlocks an education function in both directions, both between us as civil affairs professionals and as NATO and NATO and its partner nations. I think we both learn from each other, and we have to continue the dialogue where both we learn from them, and hopefully we share some lessons and best practices that can help that going forward. But I think that that's kind of my take on the irregular warfare or the hybrid conflict. So thanks, sir.
And sir, just one more point to that too. I was looking at the chat bar, and a comment came up from a in the chat bar. Basically was looking to have more of a focus on LESCO, not irregular warfare, which I completely agree, because within the European theater of operations, we understand that the threat here is going to be LESCO. I mean, that's, you know, not getting too far into specifics about it. That's what we're preparing for. We are here to fight large-scale combat operations, meet the commander's objectives, and win. 100%. Not going to argue there at all. That's what we're here for. We're part of the United States Army for that reason. Where I would say the irregular warfare piece is going to bite us in the tail, though, is that when you're talking about reconstitution and regenerating forces, and you're talking about the deep rear as far as our deep rear support areas, the enemy is going to have a vote too, right? So if you look at the red plan in the deep rear, don't look at it from the standpoint of enemy effects, red versus blue. Look at it from the standpoint of friction. So if you're trying to bring forces into theater, you're trying to reconstitute units and generate that combat power in order to have that overwhelming counter momentum force to defeat or at least present a credible deterrent to malign competition within the region. That hybrid effect, that irregular warfare, is what's going to be utilized to create that friction, to slow down that building of combat power in order to present that deterrence option, and then our decisive points if and when they become necessary. So I completely agree that LESCO needs to be the focus, and that irregular warfare, I mean, when we talk about irregular warfare, we kind of focus on the coin aspect of it. But I try to focus on it more from, as a civil affairs operator, I'm trying to facilitate the generation of combat power and acting as that, you know, indication and sensor and warning of those threats to the force, and our ability to move through the theater of operations to the float to win that fight. So that's how I would look at it from that standpoint there. But I completely agree. LESCO needs to be the focus. Irregular warfare is the friction that's going to prevent us from winning that large-scale combat operations and competition.
Hey, great discussion. Thank you, guys. Colonel Kyle, you've got a lot of experience in this theater, both as 457 Battalion Commander, G3 of 353, and now the commander of 353. What do you see in the future for civil affairs in EUCOM AOR? And then if you could talk about how your command is preparing rotational forces to go over and work on the theater.
Yeah, absolutely. So this conversation has been quite refreshing. I understand, as the last commenter said, the conversation is primarily about LESCO, but understanding the implications of IW inside of the LESCO fight is quite important. I would say there's a general feel, and not just in the civil affairs community, but across the Army, that there is concerns of our transition from COIN to LESCO. There's prevalent conversation on that. There's generally a feeling of, hey, we've done COIN for 20 odd years. Our soldiers are not prepared to do LESCO. And I will say, I do not have that concern as a 353 commander for our civil affairs teams and capabilities. And so I'm quite confident that our brigades, battalions can integrate at echelon and do those. I'm going to say, you know, if you kind of water it down to COIN being phase 0 and 1 of LISCO, and then LISCO being primarily 2 and 3. Just generally saying that as a general comment. I will say our teams are getting after understanding how to integrate at echelon and phases 2 and 3. This year, primarily, the 353 has focused on exercises that we can actually exhibit and I guess exercise those type skill sets of how to do 2 and 3, what a conventional force in a LISCO fight. I will tell you at the end of fiscal year 26, not only will my belief be just my belief, but I think we will exhibit throughout the force that 353 is prepared and actually validated to do and support that LISCO operation. And so whether it be exercises, which we can go through a few name ones, or FTNs, whether it be supporting whichever echelon of 5th Corps, 21st TSC, USARF, whoever it may be, our command is quite poised to not only exhibit the capabilities, but get those reps and sets in to be effective in the LISCO environment.
Great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Let's open it up. We kind of call a pause here for a second for any of the participants that would like to ask questions from anybody on the panel. Yes, Basir, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not a CA officer, but a crisis management guy. And I was a few months back last year in October, I was actually in CIMIC COE. So I would like to commend the CIMIC Foresight Conference because a lot of the things that I've provided, went through the food chain and specifically TikTok. So it's a very broad audience. I am very much interested in deterrence and specifically in countering hybrid warfare. How should CA expand its role? Because sometimes there's a buy-in of Russian influence even amongst high-ranking officers, at least for my country in Turkey, where I had to encounter several folks. So in that regards, both synchronization but also communication of internally. So perhaps there should be what kind of a intelligence picture should there be so that people really realize what is going on? Because if you run hybrid warfare related search terms on secondary research news media, you get a lot of developments, but those are really not making it up to the broader audience, to the public, but also decision makers. So in that regards, how do we get all of those signals relayed much better? Over. What is the role for the CA?
I'll give a very brief answer because I know Lieutenant Colonel Newman wants to. I would say that the overarching key that in the different times and the different forms that this question of hybrid warfare has come up and its ability sort of to degrade the response capability of our partner nations has come up. I think there's one uniting key that everyone says is the first place to start, and it starts with education and awareness. That's whether that's at the policymaker level or that's at the level of the citizenry who has to consider this question of limited ability to attribute, limited attributability, because that's a known TTP for the persons that are for the actors that are engaging in hybrid warfare across the NATO theater is working in gray zones and either by with and through or utilizing actors for which you can make a limited attributability back to the agent who is engaging in this question. So sometimes that's a question of promoting awareness, and sometimes that's a question of gathering evidence and allowing citizens to apply critical thinking to come to their own conclusions without necessarily sponsoring that conclusion by yourself. But the overarching question about what to do about it and how to respond has started with education and awareness. I think that's the one place that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. Red, or Russia, we'll just say what it is, they're not going to engage in LISCO without creating multiple dilemmas for us in NATO. And they're going to go after our rear area with a hybrid campaign. And they're going to go after things like logistics, power, all of these resiliencies, I want to call them, because we talk about resilience through civil preparedness. They're going to go after that. And they're going to want to do two things. So NATO overwhelmingly relies on private contractors to do its logistics, right? That's nothing new. We know this. Also, it's the information side of things too. It's swaying the mind of the public through messaging and so forth. And if your power's out or there's major civil disruptions for a war that might be 1,000 kilometers to the east, that's going to have an effect on how the population supports NATO. So CIVIC will not take direct action with hybrid. What will happen is that each nation is essentially responsible for their own resiliencies. When that becomes an issue, that gets elevated to the EU, and the EU has a number of mechanisms to do that. That's probably where it'll end. NATO probably will not get directly involved with that. That being said, the commander needs to know what's going on and how that's going to impact them. And that's where CIMIC comes in, because CIMIC knows this. CIMIC has the ability to communicate with these nations through their respective CIMIC counterparts, to then echo that back to the commander, like, sir, highway E26 has been blah, blah, blah. This is going to affect A, B, and C, but the nation believes it could be up and running in the next 3 to 4 days. Things like that. That's where the CIMIC is kind of like that key piece.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you, guys. Great discussion.
I just want to add to that too. I'm
Go
sorry, sir. I just
Yeah,
wanted to
no,
point
go
out, if I was to boil it down in a one phrase answer, it would be developing and maintaining those civil networks, identifying points of contact, getting to know the local national points of contact, because they're going to be the experts of their sphere. Through education, through and through dealing with a host nation, folks will know locally if something is out of sync or something is just a power outage because it's a power outage. We need to inform the commander, but the only way we're going to do that is through a robust development of those civil networks, maintaining the relationships with those host nation LOs, and through coordinating with our interagency partners.
Excellent. Great perspective. Thank you.
Tony, it's Albert Augustine. I had a quick question for Nate.
Yeah, Albert.
Yeah. Hey, Nate, you mentioned about the training, the CIMIC training. Is that possible for them to do online? Because I think that would get you a bigger bang for the buck. Over.
So, hey, I'm good to hear you again, man. Enjoy your retirement?
I am. Hey, thanks a lot, Nate. And I hope everything's going well.
Good. Largely, no. The CCOE did a robust online, civic training during COVID, and that was quickly done away with. Really, you got to be in the classroom. That's kind of the essence of civic, is face to face. You're meeting your counterparts, you're interacting with them, you're coming here to the mothership. Of course, this training is done in other nations. Some of the other sponsoring nations conduct this as well. There are some things online, like we do the webinars, we do a lot of the doctrinal publications, videos, things like that, but the actual CIMIC training is done here.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay, I'll open it up if there's any other questions from audience participants.
Hi,
or our
question. Can you hear me? This is Colonel Caceres.
Please go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if any CIMIC literature or online resources can be leveraged with the force. It's going to be difficult for folks to be able to get to that in-house CIMIC training, but is there anything that we can leverage that the team can forward to us? Thank you.
Yeah, I would say a couple things here. I'm bringing up our website here. It's CIMIC-coe.org. And if you go onto our website, there's a number of documents. There's a whole bunch of publications that you can access. Allied Joint Publication 3.19 is CIMIC's equivalent of FM 3-57. It's doctrine, it's a bit of a read. It can be a little dry. The CCOE then published a handbook on CIMIC, which is a much easier read that can really be disseminated down to some of the lowest tactical levels, because it's a handbook, right? But if you go to, let's see here, the CCOE's website, CIMIC-coe.org, is a knowledge hub. You'll see publications. And there's a whole bunch of things that our concepts, interoperability, and capabilities branches worked on, as well as our lessons learned and analysis branch. So we did a Ukraine study, a lessons learned study. We were talking a little bit more about CIMIC in the cyberspace domain, CIMIC in the air domain, things that really aren't spoken about regularly. Artificial intelligence in CIMIC, that's becoming increasingly more of a thing. So you'll see these publications again on the website under Knowledge Hub publications. And then there's also the Beyond the Classroom webinars, which is what myself and my colleague here at the CCOE hosted. Major Kimberly and Lieutenant Colonel Swart attended, along with a number of our German CIMIC colleagues. You could read these. Or excuse me, you could watch these webinars, and they're edited for time and clarity, of course. So there's a lot of stuff online, but to go to an actual course, you really got to be here for that. Hope that answers your question.
And the link is in the notes, just for everyone.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Looks like Jared Miller has his hand up. Jared, looks like you're on mute, unless I called on you erroneously.
Hey, Tony, I have a quick question in a statement. The problem set that Nate mentioned, as far as the active duty point of condensing at USERAF, is going to be a huge limitation for Europe, potentially, when it comes to, when we talk about war fighting at a corps and a division level. Active duty CA is not sending people there. In the war fighter, both Colonel Hannikin and Colonel Pajak could speak specific, because we're short on time, could probably speak to the group later or at another point about that limitation and what they might have to do on a reserve side. Over.
Great point. No, thank you. And yeah, we've got about 4 minutes left. If Kelly or Lieutenant Colonel Hannikin can add any of the points that Colonel Augustine raised. Over. Okay. Hey, I'm not hearing anything else. We need to turn it over for General Carter. So Caroline, I yield the floor back to you. Over.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to all the folks on the UCOM panel. This was very enlightening and obviously brushed up on some of my gaps from last time I was in theater. So I appreciate that. We're going to do a quick bio break and get a few minutes for General Carter to get herself organized. And we will be back starting up at 11:20. So you've got about 4 or 5 minutes to do whatever you need to do before the next panel. So thank you.